It's now my great pleasure to announce Dr. Jennifer Barnes, Pro-Vice-Chancellor for International Strategy at the University of Cambridge, to deliver her keynote address of this afternoon in the spirit of our theme, Women in Academia. The title of her talk is Measure for Measure: How the Quest for Equality Confounds Diversity.
President Paul, Mayor, representatives of foreign governments, university presidents, members of the supervisory board, members of the university, men and one woman of the South, great warm-up, ladies and gentlemen. It is a considerable privilege to address you today in that suspended moment when summer has packed its bags and autumn has yet to move in. It is a time when universities reaffirm our purpose, what we do and why we exist, as institutions that define the future for individuals, communities, and nations. In that spirit, I want to talk about the women and men who belong to universities, those who teach, administer, and research, and those who arrived only last week, unpacking their bags in dormitories and rooms across Maastricht, the students of today who inherit tomorrow. There can be few in this audience that do not know that being born a woman puts you at a statistical disadvantage in life. By any measure, beginning with wages and promotion, to the unimaginable violence and inhumanity towards girls in certain parts of the world, individual women have hope and choices, but many from birth do not. The dilemma, I think, for the young woman today lucky enough to reach university is how she contends with this disadvantage, whether she ignores it, focuses on it, or works with others to eliminate it. Over the last 100 years, we have made progress, particularly in the West, towards a society that values all citizens. I was struck when I watched the footage of World War I recently, reel after reel of young soldiers, all of them men, walking in uniform towards the role history assigned them. The past century has continuously questioned the role of women, but I am equally interested in what questions we ask about and of men. I believe with others that the feminist movement is the most significant social movement of the 20th century. So what will emerge as the most significant social movement of the 21st century? That's not just a rhetorical question. Universities should lead the way in answering this, with analysis, proposals, teaching, research, and initiatives in their community. Some of those arriving to start their studies in Maastricht will soon be leading the way. And speaking of leading the way, the panel discussion this morning brought together an extraordinary group of scholars, exemplifying the energy this discussion creates, and also possibilities. As the lawyer and feminist scholar Catherine McKinnon put it, if you never cross a boundary, you'll never know it's there, and you'll convince others it doesn't exist. Over the past year, I came across a lot of coverage in the media on gender imbalance or systemic discrimination against women. I wasn't looking for it, I just opened a paper or turned on the television. And I began to wonder, if I were 18 today, how would I feel about the world I was entering? Difficult, even dangerous place for a woman, and at the same time, a fraught place for men, with women leaping over barriers in education, the military, sports, and politics, barriers originally set by men. This year, for the first time in history, a Fields Medal for mathematics was awarded to a woman, the Iranian mathematician Maryam Mirzakhani. In sport, the British women's rugby team won the world champion. But must this only be a zero-sum game? Must the growing evidence of the remarkable achievements of women be set against, rather than alongside, the achievements of men? But before I go further, let me explain. As someone who trained as an opera singer, the human voice holds fascination for me, not only in what we say, but the timbre and tone we use. That led me to research how we as humans deal with anxiety, self-doubt, or more specifically, what happens in the brain when we are placed under pressure to perform. First, the human voice. Our brains recognize familiar voices. A mother can pick out her baby's cry in a room full of infants. We build security systems on voice recognition. Voices are so recognizable that when we want to protect people giving testimony, we distort their voice. Actors talk about finding their voice, but this is also what universities do: take an individual and help them find their voice. Let's think for a moment about the singer. Much of early vocal training, if it's done right, is not so much about finding a voice, but uncovering the voice the person possesses. This is often painful, as the real voice may not be the one the person thought they had. And to complicate matters, because of physiology and acoustics, the singer is the only one who can't properly hear his or her voice. Others do. Humans, that is the audience, can easily pick out a manufactured sound, so the process of uncovering your voice is also about learning to accept your own sound. As the American dancer Martha Graham once said to the choreographer Agnes de Milne, "It is not your business to determine how good it is, nor how valuable it is, nor how it compares with other expressions. It is your business to keep it yours, clearly and directly. Keep the channels open." In the university, a certain amount of typecasting still exists. The men get the low, calm, deliberate roles, while the women, particularly if they are speaking about gender imbalance, are left with the persistent, higher, dare I say, shrill frequencies. In the workplace, it is well documented that we respond with greater respect to lower voices. Many know that Britain's first and only female prime minister took voice lessons to lower her voice. But the voices around us are changing in timbre, tone, and content. Are we listening closely enough? The second aspect, what we do under pressure, involves biological and neurological responses. When I worked at the Royal College of Music, I began noticing the way different people, each with considerable talent, dealt with performance anxiety. Some turned to alcohol, others to cigarettes. The most popular and still is beta blockers. Others found an acceptance of their psychological and physical responses, and with that, the necessary courage to perform. I draw this to our attention today because in ensuring we find the best leaders and citizens in the next generation, we must look at the way we develop men and women in the university. In particular, we need to ensure that women and men have access to programs which build attributes rather than focusing on why, as women, we are having a difficult time. Recently, there have been lots of articles and even a book, The Confidence Code, published this summer, which says that what keeps women from getting to the top is their lack of confidence. I also hear in Cambridge and other places about the imposter syndrome, which is said to afflict more women than men, and is characterized by feeling, if you have actually succeeded, that you are really a fraud who will one day be found out. Basing programs for women on their lack of confidence bothers me. What a strange burden to place on young women forging their identity. Moreover, to be frank, what woman or man wants to be led by someone who constantly doubts themselves and regularly questions whether they should be in their role at all? We have evidence that when appointing senior roles, women are often seen as promising, but not yet ready. There is concern that women will not be tough enough for the job. If you compound this by telling young women that they are unconfident and likely to feel an imposter, you focus their attention on the internal, whereas the competition will be focusing on how they are going to personally progress by demonstrating how they will make a difference. It is stressful to be a young academic, always tested, finding your way, while being measured at every juncture. To be an academic leader requires strength and resilience, and could almost be defined as requiring the ability to deal with setbacks. Women, like men, are born with the capacity to endure stress. As one of my male colleagues calmly remarked to me one day, in MI6, which is the British Secret Intelligence Service, we knew most women were far tougher under torture than the men. It was the matter-of-fact way he said it that stayed with me, as if this were widely known. And it got me thinking, how different would the world be if we put women, not men, in situations other than childbirth, to withstand pain for the sake of the community? History has done a disservice to women to allocate fortitude, decisiveness, and bravery to men, and insight and compassion to women. We need to recognize that both genders have the capacity for all of these qualities. From the Iliad onward, the idealized man had physical prowess, no matter that Nelson Mandela, Albert Einstein, and Martin Luther King did not prevail by physical prowess, and Boadicea, Amelia Earhart, and Joan of Arc did. Still, the ideal of the manly persists. For example, in 1902, when the diamond magnate Cecil Rhodes wrote his will, he outlined his ideal qualities for the future Rhodes Scholars at Oxford University. Rhodes, afflicted with anemia and a serious heart problem that resulted in his death at the age of just 48, chose criteria he could never have met. Candidates should not, in his words, be merely bookworms, but also demonstrate, and I quote, literary and scholastic attainments, success in manly outdoor sports, qualities of manhood, truth, courage, devotion to duty, and sympathy for the protection of the weak, kindliness, unselfishness, and fellowship. A few years earlier, Rudyard Kipling, who knew Cecil Rhodes, wrote the poem If for his son, describing extraordinary forbearance and courage, which, if his son could emulate, led to the final words of the poem, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. I recall first reading this poem and finding resonance and inspiration in these words until the final line, when I had to do what I assume all women do, either feel diminished or quickly assure myself that if only Kipling had been alive today, he would have included this advice to his daughter. My point is that if he didn't, we should. I find myself worrying that programs that focus solely on women may narrow, not widen, our understanding of women. Why, for example, do some diversity programs frequently match young women only with senior women? Where are the mentoring programs that place outstanding young men with senior women? I'd like to see senior women academic leaders routinely mentoring young men. I know that in Europe, including the UK, only 1 in 5 professors is a woman. In some institutions, the figure is as low as 1 in 10. Across Europe, only 10% of higher education institutions are led by women. And these few women are affected by compound interest when they are placed on every university committee to ensure gender balance, which steals time from the activities by which they will be judged for promotion. I also worry that our attentiveness to what it means to be a woman in a male-dominated environment disadvantages both sides. Men left thinking diversity is for someone else, and women feeling uncomfortable about whether it means them or not. I am looking for a program that takes high-potential men and women and emphasizes criteria similar to those Rhodes drew up: protecting others, force of moral character, and kindness. Getting more women in leadership only fully recognizes our potential when accompanied by the expectation that, in the 21st century university, the role of professor must be allocated on more than the individual's ability as a scholar. To become an academic leader, we need both genders to demonstrate their capacity for truth, courage, devotion, combined with the ability to discover and promote their colleagues and the next generation. The universities that have professors, culture, and systems to detect the widest pool of talent in front of them will have the competitive advantage. Last June, I was in California's Silicon Valley, surrounded by tantalizing energy and confidence. Everything seemed so progressive and, well, so sunny as compared to the ancient, historic Europe where I have lived and worked for the last 30 years. So I was surprised to come across an online interview about the plight of women in Silicon Valley. It did not make comfortable viewing. In it, an insider described the venture capital community as a frat club gone wild and pointed to the 20% drop in women specializing in computer science since the 1970s. It was time, the speaker argued, to break the rule of silence. The majority of men, they care for women. They are respectful. They think about their daughters. They think about their mothers. The majority are like that. The minority, they went on to say, are not like that. There is a disgusting group which needs to be reined in, treated like criminals, versus being made heroes. Then a few weeks ago, my daughter showed me an article in the New Statesman. In it, the writer said, "A man complaining about anti-male sexism is the sound of a man crying about lost advantages, huge man-made thundering advantages. What do you do with this privilege? I think you let it go with as much grace as possible." These views are not new. I was reading this sort of thing in the 1970s, the exhilarating voices of feminist writers like Robin Morgan, Andrea Dworkin, and Kate Millett. What's new is that these writers are men. The first, the entrepreneur Professor Vivek Wadhwa. The second, the comedian and Cambridge University graduate Robert Webb. Could it be true that as Wadhwa and Webb contend, the majority of men advocate the benefits of gender balance? If so, That means a rethink, because the issue is not that men represent barriers to women's advancement, but that the attitude and behavior of some men need to be called what they are: brutish, aggressive, and discriminatory. And what's more, their male colleagues find that as unpleasant and unnecessary as female colleagues. Looking at my colleagues in Cambridge, I see male professors investing every bit as much energy and expectation in their female students. I see female colleagues leading key areas in the university, not because they are bringing soft skills to the workplace, but because they are tough, judicious, supportive, and raising the bar in their field. No, the key differential from my perspective is which colleagues have young children or infants, and which have no children, or their children are no longer dependents. Evidence from the US and Scandinavia shows that when trusted, affordable childcare is provided by the employer, the group with young children can continue to be productive. Otherwise, it leaves couples in weak, negotiating positions with each other, their workplace, their children, and themselves. The universities that are first in having an equal number of female and male professors and dedicated childcare will also have the agility and breadth of minds to define the successful university of the future. As an undergraduate, I attended an all-women's college and have also had the privilege of leading an all-women's college in Cambridge. So when I saw a recent article in the Tab, our student newspaper, by a student arguing against women's colleges, I prepared myself to be annoyed. The case often made, she wrote, for these female-only environments is that they allow women to take on positions of responsibility which they would usually shrink away from. The thing is, there are men in the real world. It seems like every other week another high-powered woman releases a book or article uncovering or decrying the underlying sexism and overwhelming male culture inherent in her workplace. This is where I believe, she went on, that some of the elements of mixed colleges, which at first glance can seem most unsavory, come into their own. Anyone who has ever walked into their college bar to have the name of the person they got with last night chanted for a solid 5 minutes by half the college's male drinking society would find it hard to be intimidated by a room full of graying accountants. And let's take it further. What if you could start to see these horrifying abstracted images of the patriarchy as real people? What if you found them funny? What if you realized they didn't hate women, they were just having a laugh? What if some of them became, dare I say, friends? Then suddenly a slightly macho workplace becomes less of a threat and more of an opportunity. And she concludes, I am a feminist. Why? Because I am not stupid. I've never met this young woman. Her name, because I hope we hear more from her, is Charlotte Ivers. But I loved her voice, her brio, her tough sensibility towards the world she is entering. And when she gets there, she'll realize the graying accountants will find her a wonderful colleague. They too have a life beyond the stereotype. Which brings me to my final point. Yes, we must acknowledge the injustice and institutionalized sexism that has dominated cultures around the world for over 2,000 years. But equally, we can acknowledge advances that have outlawed and outmaneuvered discrimination. The children of today's women professors are never going to think that being a woman professor is anything other than how it's meant to be. And I hope that this century acknowledges not only the diversity of women, but also the diversity of men, who are increasingly longing for children in their 20s, bringing up children, sometimes on their own, and forming alliances in the workplace that have nothing to do with gender and all to do with affinity and respect. I see this already. I experience this already. Yes, we still have some way to go, And it's not just the women who should be left to get on with it. To the women in the audience, yes, do what you need to draw upon allies, male and female, to create a strong sense of self, realizing this may not come only from support, but surviving difficult, complex periods in your life. Remember that you cannot bring out the best in others unless you are prepared to own the best in yourself. And to the men, speak out. This is not a women's issue, this is a human issue, and your voice will make a difference. Finally, as we begin the new academic year, let us recall what it was to be young and just starting out. We cannot let our wins and losses with gender equality somehow lapse, as if our incremental adjustments are the best we can offer. We have nearly won the argument that says the loss of women in the highest ranks of leadership is a loss for us all. The English writer Caitlin Moran, writing in the voice of a 17-year-old girl in her recent novel, Building a Girl, has her young narrator say, "The deepest irony about the young being cynical is that they are the ones that need to move and dance and trust the most. They need to cartwheel through a freshly burst galaxy of still forming but glowing ideas, never scared to say, 'Yes, why not?' Or their generation's culture will be nothing but the blandest, the most aggressive, or most offended of old tropes. When young people are cynical and snarky, they shoot down their own future. When you keep saying no, all that's left is what other people said yes to before you were born." For over a century, women and men have said yes to full participation of women in all spheres of life. For those of us in charge or charged with finding the next in charge, auditions are underway, and the voices are no longer singing the same repertoire. In fact, they're writing new repertoire. Are we going to continue to put on the same old cliched productions? Or have we wit enough to produce something our children will see as a moment we made real progress? Thank you.